This is an analysis of the accelerating failure to control a critical narrative. Despite aggressive attempts by the subject, Donald Trump, to shift the focus through political attacks on figures like Rosie O'Donnell and Adam Schiff, or even bizarre diversions toward Coca-Cola, the core data set concerning the Epstein files is proving mathematically intractable. The subject cannot change this fundamental reality. What we are witnessing is the unraveling of a strategic defense designed to suppress high-leverage information. The situation has intensified with the emergence of new, deeply disturbing testimony from one of Trump's alleged victims, and critically, with an apparent act of political retaliation that directly impacts the integrity of the judicial process. We must correct the common terminology immediately. The victims involved in this network were not simply women. They were children and minors. When political power is weaponized to obstruct justice and conceal crimes against children, the issue transcends individual ethics and becomes a systemic failure that demands immediate, cold, and forensic analysis. The first data point we must analyze is the seemingly inexplicable and highly provocative termination of a key federal prosecutor. Sources confirm that Maren Comey, a prominent assistant U.S. attorney for SDNY and the daughter of former FBI Director James Comey, was abruptly fired. She played a critical role in prosecuting not only Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, but also in high-profile cases like the Diddy trial. The question is not if this firing is linked to Trump. Given his documented history of targeting perceived enemies, including James Comey and the FBI reportedly opening a probe into Comey's actions last week, but rather, what operational logic supports this decision? Let's apply the logic matrix. Function of Maren Comey. Politico reported that a judge upheld the FBI's denial of access to the bulk of the Epstein records largely due to a formal declaration from Comey. She argued that disclosing those investigative records was likely to interfere with the appeal in Maxwell's case. This means Comey's immediate legal role was to protect the integrity of the Epstein-Maxwell prosecution process by keeping certain records secure and out of the public domain. The catastrophic cognitive inconsistency. Trump has repeatedly labeled the Epstein files a Democratic hoax created by Obama, Biden, and Clinton to attack him. Yet, he, or his administration, fires the very prosecutor who was actively preventing the full disclosure of those hoax records to the public. If the files are a hoax, why fire the person who was technically keeping the evidence of the hoax contained? If the goal is transparency, which his opponents claim to want and which he denies, why remove the person who locked up Maxwell and was pursuing other high-profile sex crime cases? The action makes absolutely no sense unless you assume the subject is operating from a position of extreme panic and self-preservation. The only consistent explanation is that Comey, despite her role in securing the Maxwell conviction, was perceived as a wild-card risk. She possessed deep operational knowledge of the Epstein network and its prosecution strategy. Removing her destroys that institutional knowledge and sends a clear message of intimidation to anyone else deep in the SDNY prosecution pipeline. This is not governance. This is legal process destruction, a calculated effort to introduce chaos and eliminate expertise where it is needed most to prosecute high-level sex crimes. The market reaction confirms this analysis. Polymarket, a prediction market, indicated a 99% chance that Donald Trump is named in the Epstein files. Prediction markets, unlike public opinion polls, reflect financial bets on outcomes. They are highly motivated by access to real, though often private, data signals. This massive probability spread indicates that the institutional and financial consensus is that the subject is deeply implicated. When even the markets are signaling a near certainty of guilt, the firing of a key prosecutor is an act of maximum risk acceleration. This systemic inconsistency is further amplified by the subject's past behavior regarding the very documents he now calls a hoax. Who can forget the stunning operational failure when the Trump administration gave binders of the Epstein files to MAGA influencers? The subject and his allies now claim those binders contained a Democratic hoax. This requires a severe breakdown in logic. They knowingly distributed a supposed enemy weapon to their own foot soldiers. This isn't strategic, it's systemic recklessness. It validates the core thesis that the subject is incapable of managing sensitive information, and his primary strategy relies on controlling narrative through intentional weaponized chaos, even if that chaos self-immolates his own position. We now pivot from the cold analysis of political strategy to the devastating emotional data that has recently emerged, the unearthed testimony from one of the alleged victims. This is the crucial point where the political noise stops and the crime itself must be examined. The details of the testimony, which must be recounted with extreme caution and respect for the victim's trauma, reveal not just sexual predation, but the calculated weaponization of state power to enforce coercion. The victim, who was a child at the time, describes a scenario where the subject became angry and allegedly threatened to call immigration on Maria, another victim, if the demanded sexual acts were not performed correctly. This specific detail, the threat of deportation, is the most damning structural data point in the entire testimony. It moves the act from a simple abuse of personal power to the cynical exploitation of the state mechanism. The subject used the immense, terrifying power of the federal government, the power to separate families and destroy lives, as a tool to enforce sexual compliance. Reference The Guardian report on survivor Marina Lacerda describing Epstein boasting about owning the government and using immigration threats. The victim recalls the subject's actions and words. "You can't even understand what you're saying. You speak English," coupled with derogatory comments before demanding the victim demonstrate the act herself. The feeling reported by the victim was one of constant intimidation, where the game was never about pleasure, but about extreme power. The subject's satisfaction was directly correlated to his ability to exercise total, devastating control over individuals stripped of their legal protections. We must be precise in our terminology. These victims were minors, children. The attempt by certain segments of the media or political sphere to minimize this by referring to them as women or suggesting they were willing participants is a moral and analytical failure. As the audience correctly stresses, the fact that the alleged victim was 13 years old at the time and the subject allegedly bragged about this due to his own daughter's age elevates the crime to a horrific degree. The entire narrative reported by the victim, the shame, the fear, the confusion about whether the threat of calling immigration was real, underscores the profound power asymmetry failure at the heart of this network. The individuals who committed these crimes did so knowing they had immunity, financial resources, and, in the subject's case, access to the tools of state repression. The core principle here is not complex. Justice for minors is non-negotiable. The people who committed these acts, the assailants, who should be labeled pedophiles and criminals, must face accountability, regardless of political affiliation or wealth. The continued attempt to deny this reality by calling it a political hoax is to actively participate in the cover-up of crimes against children. We are looking at a monstrous systemic betrayal of the most vulnerable. This specific detail, the threat of deportation, is the most damning structural data point in the entire testimony. It moves the act from a simple abuse of personal power to the cynical exploitation of the state mechanism. The subject used the immense, terrifying power of the federal government, the power to separate families and destroy lives, as a tool to enforce sexual compliance. Reference The Guardian report on survivor Marina Lacerda describing Epstein boasting about owning the government and using immigration threats. The final piece of this analysis involves the reaction of the subject and his most fervent allies, which has become a study in self-destruction. The behavior of figures like Alex Jones is revealing. Jones, a key ally, exhibited visible distress and cognitive dissonance, publicly labeling the entire unfolding narrative a Democrat hoax, while simultaneously being chastised by Trump on Truth Social for even discussing the matter. Jones describes this chaotic turn as self-destructive temper tantrum stuff. Trump's calculated demand to his base, "I don't want your support. Anybody that even talks about this again, you are bad," is a classic reverse psychology command designed to control the narrative through fear, not logic. However, this strategy is failing because the stakes are too high. As Jones accurately noted, telling people not to talk about something only makes them look into it more. We can analyze this using a risk maximization analogy. The subject is acting like a panicked individual who has thrown rotten meat into shark-infested waters, the release of the files and the victim testimony. And now, instead of retreating, he is stripping down and cutting himself with razor blades on the plank, preparing to jump in. This metaphor, though graphic, accurately reflects the subject's operational state. He is not just ignoring the risk. He is actively accelerating the probability of catastrophe. His political strategy, the 5D chess he is constantly accused of playing, has devolved into a series of frantic, self-defeating tantrums. This is not Hegelian dialectics. This is pure emotional volatility overriding strategic competence. The political fragmentation signal. The most significant long-term impact is the fragmentation of the subject's core base. For the first time, a wedge is being driven between the MAGA movement and its leader over a moral issue that transcends economics or policy. The base, which is largely comprised of parents, grandparents, and people with strong moral values, cannot easily rationalize the cover-up of crimes against minors. The final piece of this analysis involves the reaction of the subject and his most fervent allies, which has become a study in self-destruction. The behavior of figures like Alex Jones is revealing. Jones, a key ally, exhibited visible distress and cognitive dissonance, publicly labeling the entire unfolding narrative a Democrat hoax, while simultaneously being chastised by Trump on Truth Social for even discussing the matter. Jones describes this chaotic turn as self-destructive temper tantrum stuff. This presents a critical juncture for political opportunists. The smart politicians, the ones who want to position themselves for a post-Trump future, will not defend Trump. They will instead support the base by demanding transparency and condemning the systemic failure. They will capitalize on this fracture point because, as the opponent correctly observed, without his hardcore base, Trump is nothing. The calculated support of the base against the leader's self-destructive chaos is the optimal strategy to weaken Trump and accelerate his political irrelevance. This crisis is therefore not about impeachment or a single legal case. It is a battle for the moral integrity of an entire political movement. The electoral hard reset remains the ultimate mechanism for accountability. The evidence is conclusive. The subject is fundamentally unfit for command because his personal failings translate directly into active threats to national security and the rule of law. We must use the political system to de-risk the executive branch by voting out all corrupted components. This is a demand for operational integrity at the highest level of government. If you believe that justice for children, data integrity, and accountability must supersede political manipulation, then like and share this video. Subscribe to our channel so we can continue to analyze these logic failures and maintain the pressure until the system is fully recalibrated. Thank you. The final piece of this analysis involves the reaction of the subject and his most fervent allies, which has become a study in self-destruction. The behavior of figures like Alex Jones is revealing. Jones, a key ally, exhibited visible distress and cognitive dissonance, publicly labeling the entire unfolding narrative a Democrat hoax, while simultaneously being chastised by Trump on Truth Social for even discussing the matter. Jones describes this chaotic turn as self-destructive temper tantrum stuff.